Hi, Timothy Hoagie again. In this video, I'm going to talk about the three components of the English language. When I say English language, that's what we're studying. We don't want to compare it to other languages, simply English. And so some of the rules that we look at in English, those are English, and we want to apply those to English words. So when we say a word, for example, no English word ends with an I. Well, there are words that end with an I, but they're not English. So there are many times they're a loan word. They come from another language that we've taken as whole. For example, an Italian word or a Spanish word or African word. They may end with an I, but they're not English. So we're talking about English words. And we have three components of our language. First of all, let's take a look at the three parts of our language. What makes up the English language? Old English, which is European-based language. We have Latin, and we have Greek. Those were put together and brought together to establish the language they have called English. Long history involved with that. When we study the English language, we look at three components. The most important one is morphology, which is meaning. And many have heard of morphemes. And many times morphemes are taught second, sometimes the last thing that we brought up into the classroom when we instructed. I know I did. Phonology was number one. How do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce this? That's not true. I did that up to about 7 years ago when I ran across Pete Bauer's information, P-O-W-E-R-S. And he taught me that morphology is number one. And it made perfect sense to me. Our brain is searching for meaning immediately. And that's what we want children to do. Notice when children get to a word, we've trained them to immediately start trying to sound out a word. And that's what we don't want them to do. Look at the word. Do you know the word? If you don't, search for the meaning. Pronunciation does not top morphology, which is meaning. And so when we're talking about morphology, we're talking about prefixes, suffixes, and then the base. So let's take a look at the word intersection. We have a prefix, I-N-T-E-R. Notice I don't pronounce that. I state the letters because it is not a free base. It is a prefix. You can't enter something, so you simply state the letters, I-N-T-E-R. And we teach children to do that. S-E-C-T is your base, and it means cut. And I-O-N is your suffix. So an intersection is something that cuts between, because I-N-T-E-R has a sense of between, and it simply means cutting between. The I-O-N is a noun-forming suffix in this case, so it simply means something that cuts between something. We may have an idea of it being a section with stop signs and something in that nature, but that's what an intersection is. So that's meaning. We're looking for that meaning, and we teach children to look for the base. It's not called the root, it's called the base. In your instruction, some of you that are working with children, if you're like me, you were teaching children to look at that prefix and suffixes, and we were forgetting that base. So remember, that base is the most important thing, and that base then goes through all the other words that have that base. They all have the same denotation or same meaning relating to cut somehow. For example, insect, same base. I-N is a prefix. And what can you do with an insect? You can cut it into three parts. That's the fun part about it, and children start saying, oh, that makes total sense. The second thing that we look at is etymology, and that's the history of a word. Where does it come from? Latin, Old English, is it Greek? And that has an element that will help us with understanding how to pronounce, for example, the PH if we see it. That may be an indication that it's from Greek. So we bring in etymology often, and the last thing that we bring in is phonology. Now we start talking about what the letters are doing, but that's not the first thing. And that is a flip from what we've been doing for decades, the last century, and that is phonology first. We do morphology first, meaning. Search for meaning, search for meaning, search for meaning. What does that word mean? And how do you know it means that? What's indicating that? So those are the three components of our language that help me understand what we're teaching and how do we help children whether they're reading at grade level, below grade level, and definitely I want to help those children that are working above grade level because they love searching words and we'll never run out of words. Gina Cook says we have over 1 million words in our language, so we'll always have words to investigate. If you have questions, go to our webpage, Northern State University, and click on the education page, and you'll see a reading clinic. You'll have contact information there. Contact me, and I'll explain it more in detail. Thank you.